So, hi Mark.
Hi, good to see you again.
Good to see you again. So we just realized that you were our first international friend of the show. So you're the only international. That's right. So I think it was 2 years ago at Build that we initially talked, and Service Fabric was just GA.
We just GA'd, yes.
Yeah.
It was 2 years ago. Yes, we
San
GA'd it
Francisco,
2 years ago.
Yeah,
Yes.
San Francisco.
3 years ago we announced, and 2 years ago we GA'd.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now there are other big announcements at Build this year.
Yes.
Because you've got a whole different SKU coming up.
Yes, yeah. The thing that we announced this time at Build is we announced a new version of Service Fabric called Service Fabric Mesh. And what that is that the way I like to think about it is this. Today we have this one product called Standalone where you can deploy it yourself, and you have to look after the hardware, you have to stand up the cluster, and then you have to put your applications on it.
Yeah.
And then there's Service Fabric in Azure, where Azure gives you the hardware, but you have to manage the cluster and deploy your applications.
Yeah.
Well, Service Fabric Mesh is the infrastructure free. No, you don't see any underlying VMs. It's the serverless offering where you just build the application and you deploy it into Azure, and we'll scale up and run it all for you. So what that means is that we stand up Microsoft LAN, big clusters of machines, and you just build applications and deploy and run them.
Cool. So no cluster management, no patching,
No
nothing,
VMs.
just
No VMs and things like that, and all that's taken away from you. And that's pretty cool. And what's so cool about this is, like, you know, the majority of our support calls that we get today, people phone up, oh, how do I add a new machine to my cluster?
Yeah.
Or how do I do certificate rollover upgrade to my cluster?
Yeah.
How do I, what's a VM node type? All this sort of stuff. And it's a lot of, now if you're not strongly in the ops side of things, and if you're not strong with sort of networking or infrastructure side of things, and you just want to be a developer, if you just want to be a developer, this is really good.
just want to run my business logic, so give me a place where I can dump this code and run it for me.
Now became really as a service. You know,
As a service.
you have your application code running. You can just deploy it, and you have a platform that does a whole lot of things for you, and you don't have to manage it yourself. So that's pretty cool. Yeah.
And what's important as well is it still holds true to what a microservice is, yes?
Yes.
So if you're familiar with Service Fabric, we have this concept of an application, and then you have these services underneath it all.
Right.
Well, we've taken that and turned it into a sort of a first-class Azure resource type. So there's application, Service Fabric application is a resource, Service Fabric service is a resource type.
Oh, nice.
And now, when you deploy that, you just see a JSON ARM template if you want to do it this way.
Oh, cool.
And then the service can have characteristics about it all. So you can say, here's just one replica for this, or this service just wants to use 2 cores and this amount of memory. And you just describe it, and then you give it to the Azure, and we go off and deploy this thing for you.
And does this also light up in for instance, Visual Studio, in the tooling, the extensions and the project templates?
Yes. So I mean, what's so good about this is that we didn't abandon anything from the Visual Studio side. So all your local development experience that you're used to from Service Fabric today, we took advantage of the fact that you still have this local cluster, and now you can sort of develop this locally. What's cool about the Visual Studio experience that we've done is that inside Service Fabric Mesh is that everything gets deployed in containers. Yes.
Okay.
So we took this, and that's important because what happens is really Service Fabric Mesh is about building a multi-tenant environment.
Right.
So everything runs in a container,
Yeah.
everything runs in an isolated network, you deploy it all. So locally, you can debug all inside your containers. So the Visual Studio guys have done this amazing job of local debugging, and you can set breakpoints inside your containers and things like this.
Cool. And that's both Linux and Windows containers?
Yes, both Linux and Windows containers.
Cool.
Yes, including, well, the local debugging experience you're going to get right now is, actually it is local Windows containers.
Yeah, so if I've got a mixed, a hybrid application of Linux and Windows containers, I don't need to make the choice again for should I stand up a Linux or a Windows cluster. I could just deploy both to the
That will
mesh.
come eventually. Yes, that's the aim.
That's the idea.
Actually, the aim is inside your app. Yes,
Yeah.
you can have one service as a Linux cluster, Linux app as a service, and another one as a Windows one. We have to do some more work in Service Fabric to make that work.
And does that run on top of Docker? For instance, Docker for Windows, or is it its own runtime? Or
No, it's Docker for Windows.
So
Everything's
it's on
just
top
Docker
of Docker.
containers. Yes. So this makes it now, because a lot of the time, when people still use containers, there's so much more work you have to do on top of all this. So let me tell you more else, which is what makes Service Fabric Mesh interesting. And when I talk about this, it actually applies to all of Service Fabric. So as well as having these applications deployed in containers, we also have it now that we've done state persistence better. So you can attach volume drives to the containers, and that allows you to store state.
Yeah.
And one volume drive allows you to store state in an Azure file, and another one is on Azure, Service Fabric storage. So now you can create stateful containers very easily.
Oh, cool.
And
that state is replicated across the cluster just as with reliable collections.
yes, it is just like that. So that's, what happens is we took our replication mechanism, we turned it into a block store. So it looks like a mounted drive on those machines.
Oh, cool.
And then you can just attach that to the volume drive. Well, then we took because we needed to make sure that Service Fabric Mesh could run and will have any. Our goal was that you could take any framework and any programming model of your choice and build applications with it all. We wanted it so you could bring reliable collections to other frameworks as well, not just .NET Core. So we separated that out into its own deployable package now.
Oh, okay.
So that means now that you can bring in reliable collections into your ASP.NET application, your Node.js application, even in your Go application one day and things like this.
Oh, cool.
And then deploy these inside the containers.
Nice.
So I think that's an interesting thing as well that happened.
Yeah.
This will basically be the platform to develop your services on, right? So
Yeah.
Yes.
you can choose anything you want, and you can just run it on top of Service Fabric. Pretty cool. And can I just, if I have an existing Service Fabric application, can I just migrate it to Mesh, or do I need to do any work in there?
Well, the existing reliable services and reliable actors, that won't migrate, unfortunately. That kind of has to stay on what we call your single tenant clusters. And the reason why is that programming model that we developed gets very tightly hooked into the existing Service Fabric runtime. So we had this on open, on close event, and it gets hooked into this life cycle. And that coupling seemed like a good idea at the time, but it actually causes sometimes you can hold up these deployments and things like this. So because of that, in Mesh or in a multi-tenant world, you can't have that any interaction with the underlying infrastructure. So that unfortunately, but saying that, we're going to try and find ways to get the active programming model to work if we can.
In the meantime, you can use akka.net, right?
Yes. In fact, that's exactly.
Yeah.
You can stick akka.net in containers.
Yes.
Deploy it inside that, and off you go. So, in some ways,
Everything is in a container. It's easy.
everything's in a container is easy. Well, I think another exciting development that we're building into core Service Fabric as well is this intelligent routing that we've got and done. And what we found was, as well as people having a harder time managing the cluster, there's still a sort of fairly big leap about how you have to build sort of a gateway front end, where your requests come in from Azure. We first have to send them usually to a gateway service, and in the gateway service you look at some characteristics of the message, and then you have to do some routing to other services. And quite often today you use this reverse proxy that we have, and it routes it all and things like this. But this works well, but it's fairly simplistic. We did a great piece of work with Traffic. Do you know Traffic, the reverse proxy?
Yeah, it's another reverse proxy, right?
Yes.
So I believe there's a plugin available now on their GitHub page.
Yes. So Traffic, there's a bit of a divergence, we'll come back to that one. But Traffic was a fantastic reverse proxy. We integrated with this, and now we have quite a lot of customers who just take Traffic and then they deploy it as an application gateway across the front end, and then they can set up all those routing rules for them. So that's one thing we did. But we recognized that this was a tough problem. And so we decided to take Envoy, which is another reverse proxy, and we're baking that into Service Fabric, so you can host this as a service across your front-end machines,
Cool.
and then requests can come in and you can route this. And we'll use this in Service Fabric Mesh for routing between not only the requests that come from Azure to your first service, but between the services inside your application.
Cool. So does that completely replace the reverse proxy then?
Yes. In fact, we're going to gut the reverse proxy and re-implement it all just with Envoy.
Okay. Is that a mesh only, or will that also move over to the other SKUs?
No, on all the other SKUs, you'll have this.
Okay.
So the benefit is in all, whether you're on standalone or in Azure or inside Civic Mesh, you'll have this envoy, intelligent routing of your requests that come in, and you'll be able to route the messages between your services as well. And I think this is, it's going to take us a few more months to finish this, but I think once you see this thing, I think it will really, I think this is the biggest blocker I see when people build microservices today. There's this communication, this failure, this retry, and all this sort of thing. And I think we only stopped so far today.
And in the current version, there's this remoting you can use between services if you just want to send messages, and a lot of stuff's done for you then.
Yes.
Will that work in Mesh, or?
That will work.
Okay.
Yes.
That's good news.
Yes.
That makes your life a lot easier.
That makes your life, yes. Yes, Service Fabric remoting will still work inside Service Fabric Mesh. You know, again.
By the way, we need to have a sticker of Mark doing this. It will just work.
Yes.
This will be the best marketing for Service Fabric. That's a tip.
So how about virtual networks then? Because if I now deploy a cluster into Azure, I can choose my own virtual network.
Yes.
And maybe I've got a VNet set up with a VPN tunnel to some partner or something, something like that. If I deploy a container on Service Fabric Mesh, can I somehow influence in which VNet that is going to land?
That's a piece of work we've yet to do. In fact, like if you look at Azure container instances right now, they GA'd back in April. They have the same scenario where I just want a container running and I want to hook it up to my existing VNet that I already have and just deploy it inside that. So we're waiting on a piece of work from the Azure networking team to allow you to bring your own VNet and say, when I deploy this application, deploy it in hooked up to this particular VNet, so I can see this deployment running inside this VNet.
Oh, very
So yes, you'll be able to do that because
it will be at the application level.
It's at the application level, yes. Because you have all these scenarios where someone already has a database, it's inside their VNet, and all they want to do is build a new application and access that database already.
So we've got a scenario like that with a customer where we are collecting telemetry from smart meters, and then we've got different VNets set up with device connectivity to different types of devices, and we need the services that do the actual collecting need to run inside of those VNets.
Yeah, I think that's kind of I think without that scenario, I mean, app service used to suffer from not having this for a long time, and so they couldn't do this, and so I think that complaint has been so loudly heard that the Azure networking team are helping us there. So we're not there right now, but imagine in about a few months' time.
And once the networking team is done with that, all the higher level services can make use of that functionality.
Exactly. So it's not just us; it's also ACI and these other services are all waiting on this sort of thing. But that scenario is a pretty important scenario because you need to integrate with existing systems around.
Cool.
Yes. So there's that. So there's intelligent routing, and I think the important thing about to realize is that we've done a lot of investment in Service Fabric itself that will benefit you across all these different versions. The other thing that we focused a lot on recently, so another thing I want to say recently, we just did a release of Service Fabric 6.2 runtime.
Yeah.
What I like about this is now everything is in place that's GA'd, so you can build GA full framework application for .NET Framework on Windows. We GA'd the Java runtime on Linux.
Okay.
And then now we have GA .NET Core on Windows and Linux. So like everything is there.
Yeah.
And then of course this time last year we did Windows containers, and then at Ignite last year we did Linux containers. So you can do containers, .NET Core, full .NET Framework, Java, and executables, all as part of your application in any way you want.
And because it's running in containers, also we saw some cool demos of just Service Fabric cluster running on edge devices, like small, low-power devices, and I think that's really cool.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, you touch on the other thing now that what's happening with Service Fabric is that we got pulled into the IoT core team, and they said to us, well, everything that we've done with IoT Edge today, it's all single device. And they had all of these critical business scenarios where they said, because they're running more things on the edge now, They want to run these more machine learning models on the edge.
Yeah.
So they have these things like oil and gas companies. They have this oil pump that goes up and down, and they're doing things like running a machine learning model of how the pump pressure has to change over time from all the telemetry. And if they just run it on one device and the device fails, the whole pump stops in there. So what we've gone and done now is we've taken Service Fabric and running it on edge devices, on IoT Core and these sort of things to provide an HA Service Fabric cluster here. And then IoT Edge applications just become highly available on top of that cluster, so that if one of the machines divides, then it just fails over another one, which is super cool actually, because now you have HA on the edge with exactly the same programming model here. You have your own on-premise clusters. You then have clusters inside Azure, and then you have Service Fabric Mesh, which is completely.
So you've basically got this single microservice model where you can run it everywhere you want.
That's a great way of saying it.
You must have received an email once by someone asking about running Service Fabric on Raspberry Pi.
Oh, yeah.
Now I saw it in the demo that Mark son of
Who would do such a thing?
Who would?
Wow. I don't think his wasn't a Raspberry Pi. It was some other.
It was something else.
It was something else.
But I think that's really powerful if you can, because if people think about clusters of microservices, they think about big things, cloud, large applications, but also these edge devices can really benefit from the failover scenarios and stuff like that. That Service Fabric gives you. So I think it's really powerful.
And what the other thing we've done that I think is also interesting is that with these, we had a lot of people who built. It's amazing what happens. People phone us up sometimes, and they're running this 100 machine cluster locally on all these machines, and we go, "Oh, really?"
Wow, nice.
But one of the issues that we had on premise was that people were still having to find where the package was, still trying to find the right configuration file and set it all up. So what we've also done is that now that's going to be coming in the next couple of months is you can set up your edge clusters much more easily by describing your set of machines and their IP addresses. You post this up into our resource provider inside Azure, and then we'll take all the right packages for you, download it onto your physical machines that you own on premise, and it will configure them all for you. And then you can either walk away at that point and I'm done, or you can let your cluster be registered up in Azure. And so in the next few months you'll be able to go into Azure and you'll be able to see your on-premise clusters, and you can manage them there as well as your Azure clusters. And you'll also see all your edge clusters as well. So you can see edge clusters, your PCs and things like that, as well as Azure clusters.
Manage it all from one place.
You can manage it all in one place,
Even while all your sensitive data and stuff is safely on-premise.
Safely on-premise, things like this. And I guess while we're on the on-premise theme, I noticed 2 days ago that we actually just at this build, we shipped a plugin in the marketplace on Azure Stack. If you have any Azure Stack customers, and you can go into the Azure Stack marketplace now, and you click deploy Service Fabric cluster there now, and they'll take this template and deploy a standalone cluster on your Azure Stack if you use Azure Stack.
Is that also the 6.2 version? Are those versions aligned over normal on-premises Azure and Azure Stack?
Yes, I mean Azure Stack. I think the template they've shipped inside there. Actually, I don't know what version of it is. I think it's not 6.2. I think it's one before that. Okay. But once you've deployed your cluster, either you have to upgrade it yourself. But you can register this cluster now with Azure, and we'll upgrade it for you. So the good thing about registering your on-premise cluster with Azure now is you get auto upgrades, or you can
upgrade
you can upgrade your on-premise cluster. So whether your cluster is in Azure Stack or on-premise, you get those auto upgrades. So that's the goal, and that includes all of those edge clusters as well. Because those edge clusters are kind of interesting, because the scenario where those work is that they have all of these little devices that sometimes don't get plugged in for a year. They're sitting on some shelf somewhere and things like that. And then they plug them all in, then they wake up, then they register to Azure, and then they build the cluster, and then the cluster suddenly appears. That's the scenario.
Cool. Good stuff.
These are nice toys.
These are all nice toys. So hey, what else would happen? I think, to me, the other thing that also has happened quite a lot is just general Windows containers work. From a scenario perspective, the thing that we see a huge amount happening now is customers taking existing applications and moving them into Windows containers
Yeah.
and just cost consolidation.
The lift and shift scenario.
The lift and
And
shift.
is that really production ready now, Windows containers? Or is it still...
I would say, is that the leading question? I think it is. Yes, I think, I mean, we've certainly, I mean, this time last year we moved Alaska Airlines over and they've been running for a year.
Okay.
And they haven't had, I mean, they went through Black Friday, their biggest event of the year, and everything was smooth. So they were happy. So yeah, I think you could say it is right now, a year later after, Windows containers have been out. I think they have a few challenges. I mean, one of the biggest challenges I think with Windows containers at the moment is that each one of the releases that come out at the moment, they're doing some breaking changes between them all.
Yeah.
So like 1709 and 1802 is breaking, and they're going to break it again. And I think that gets a little bit hard for people. Their goal is to kind of get to the end of this year and stop that. But I would say it is production ready. Yes, you just have to. There's still some maturity to happen.
Yeah.
But we've worked with some big partners like Accenture and Disney, who took hundreds of applications. They put them all into Windows containers. Many of these applications they couldn't change. They were all on like port 443 or port 80. And then inside the Service Fabric cluster, you could now set up this open network where all of the containers get their own IP addresses. And then they don't have to change the code. They can deploy multiple containers on port 80, but with different IP addresses.
And so they don't have any port conflicts.
So they don't have port conflicts, and then but they still have to set up this gateway. And that sort of thing. But once they've done this, it means that they can take. Before they had 5 machines here, 5 machines here, 5 machines here. Now they have one cluster, and then pack them all in there. Big one, yes. But they pushed the CPU levels up, yes? So they had like one cluster of 5% CPU, one cluster of 5%
so it's
CPU.
much more dense.
More density.
Now they push the CPU of 50% CPU, yes?
Okay.
So they push the density up and it becomes cheaper to run. And I think that's a thing that we're seeing lots and lots of that happening.
Cool. So if anybody wants to get started on Service Fabric Mesh, where would they go to? Because I believe it's in private preview right now.
It is.
There's a public preview coming up, I suppose, sometime.
Yes. So right now there's a private preview that we're running. We've been running it for a couple of months. If you go to aka.ms /sf was it SF Mesh Preview.
SF Mesh Preview.
Yes.
We will add a link.
SF Mesh Preview. I couldn't remember. I think Service Fabric Mesh Preview also works.
Okay.
Yes. You can sign up. We let people in new batches. Most of it is to do with sort of a capacity allocation that we're doing at the moment and things. We're hoping that the public preview is weeks away.
Okay. Cool.
Sooner rather than later. We're hoping it's going to be, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, this early summer. We tried to get ready for build, but it was just too much for us on top of it. But I think it's an exciting development if you are wanting to build something and run it, and given that many things will be running inside containers in the future, it's an exciting direction for a microservice container approach. Rather than mostly today, when you deal with containers, it's still infrastructure stuff.
A lot of stuff for
Yes.
itself.
So you can sign up for that. Please sign up. And what will also happen is the people in the private preview right now, they'll, in fact, in end of next week, you'll be getting the Visual Studio tools.
Great.
Part of all of that. You'll see inside the tools there's a new application model we had to develop using YAML format that made it a bit more developer friendly.
Okay. So that replaces the application manifest and service manifest XMLs then?
It does, yes. I mean, the other thing that happened there was that those manifests were very again tightly coupled to the cluster. So we did two things: is decouple it from the cluster, and we also wanted many of these resources so that you could separate them all out. So you could have a secrets resource and a volume resource and an application resource, and then you stitch them together. So I could have like 2 volume resources that are used by this app, and then another volume resource used by this app. So that was the aim of this. So when you see it, you'll see it's a lot more intuitive in terms of separate resources.
Right,
We also found that helped with team development a lot more. With the current application manifest, when I change one thing down here, I have to change the application version and that sort of thing. Inside Service Fabric Mesh, the concept of types has gone away.
Okay.
Yes, there's inside Service Fabric today, you have a type definition and an instance definition.
Yeah.
Well, in Mesh, we decided just to go for the instance definition.
Okay.
So, although you have a template structure, you just create a template and then you create an instance from it, and then off you go and run that. And then we will take care of all the auto versioning for you. So we'll do the auto versioning, and even if you just change one thing, we'll auto version it. So that instance-based model makes things a lot easier because you don't see types anymore.
Yeah. And you can still do rolling upgrades this way?
Oh yes, yes. In fact, rolling upgrades becomes a matter now of just going into your application JSON format or your ARM template and changing a few characteristics in it and resubmitting it into Azure, and then it kicks off the rolling upgrade for you. So this, I think, will become a lot easier for you of how you just redeploy an application, just like you do with any other Azure deployment today.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yes.
I want to get my laptop right now.
Let's start.
Let me code some.
So I think those were some of the big announcements. Edge, Mesh, continuing to invest in Service Fabric itself.
Yeah.
We've built many new services in Microsoft on this.
Yeah.
Visual Studio Team Systems, Stream Analytics, Azure Container Registry, Postgres database, MySQL database. Cosmos DB was already running them. Yes, but these are all new services.
This is actually the only product that can actually rock the name Fabric, right? Because it actually is a fabric.
It's a
that
true
runs
fabric.
lots of
Event
services.
Grid.
Yeah.
All small services.
Yeah, small services. Yes. I hopefully also in a few months' time we'll be talking about how all those Service Fabric applications that we built today become also available outside of just Azure as well.
Exactly.
I think that will be a thing to think about as well.
awesome.
Cool.
But that's the thing that we also think is a future direction of things.
Okay.
But all those services, so we use it pretty heavily inside Microsoft itself. We run it on millions of calls, about tens of thousands of new calls every day we launch on this.
Wow.
So that's kind of the scale we run it.
We actually see the sun shining upon us.
yeah.
It's
It's an element.
We are really excited about it, but a lot of people that we talk to also say, "Oh, Service Fabric, I have to look into that." And then once they see the power of it, they're sold.
Yes. Yeah, I do think sometimes that that's the hardest thing, that you have to still wade your way through in terms of Azure, these different options around these things. We make it more confusing each week by adding more. But I think we've seen these sort of patterns where people build Service Fabric stateless services and use Cosmos DB as a backend, and that's a very common one. I don't know if do you see?
Yes, we've seen it.
Do you see that one?
Yeah.
Do you see other versions of combinations?
Well, generally speaking, I see a lot of choices where they choose not to use stateful services because it will add partitioning and it will increase complexity, and they just choose some external database or even just blob storage or table storage if latency is not very important.
And I think that's a great way to start. I really do. I think that's the way to go. I think we better build that data viewer at some point. Yes, which I feel.
I can imagine you get a lot of requests for that one.
Yes, I know. I think. Well, I think when I decided that we open sourced it all, but we didn't make enough noise about that thing. So I'll go back and make sure we do something on that. But yeah, I think investing in Service Fabric and getting people to understand, I think the other interesting thing, maybe you see this more, that people talk about microservices a bit more, let's say, frequently now, or frequently.
But then you also hear people talk a lot about containers and really being focused on the container layer, and then you also get to the discussion. Why should I use Service Fabric as an orchestrator instead of Kubernetes as an orchestrator instead of some other orchestrator?
Yes.
Whereas I think it's much more interesting to just look at the microservice concept, just go a bit higher in the abstraction level.
Exactly.
And then I think Service Fabric is a really interesting product, if you see where it runs, you just build that microservice once, and you can run it basically everywhere.
Yes, exactly. And that's the goal. We want to make sure that you can build your application once, run it from the edge all the way through to Azure, and up level it, the conversation. So, when you build from a microservice design pattern, you're having to not deal with all the complexities of messaging retries and failure and that sort of stuff. So you build business, real applications. So, I think we'll continue to push on that and make it better each month.
Yeah, we will advocate for that also. So.
Yes.
Nice.
So looking forward to all these changes coming.
Yes.
We will check into with you next year. Okay?
Yes.
If you've got the time.
Yes, I will be here next year. Hopefully we'll have it in Seattle again next year, because it's nice and easy for us in Seattle.
Yeah.
We just have to drive down the road and we can bring lots of swag to the booths and things like this. And
We can look forward to some GA announcements maybe.
Yes, yes.
like that.
I'd love to think that before this time next year, but maybe let's say this time next year, we'll talk about GA announcements and things like this. But certainly before then, we'll be having many public previews for Service Fabric Mesh and other releases on a regular basis. So look out for those. And of course, I also kind of want to just put a call down for, we do a monthly Q&A session. So if you ever want to do we do a monthly community call on the third Thursday of every month. We do 2 times now. We do one at
a time zone.
we do one at 9 o'clock Pacific time, and we do one at 4 o'clock Pacific time. And I think for Europe, actually, the morning one is still the better choice. But come to the community calls every month, and you can ask any question. We love those sort of things. Yeah, it's really good to hear people's questions, and that way you can get a chance to figure out what we're doing.
Get in contact with the teams.
Yes.
Awesome.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, it's fantastic being here, and I love talking to you guys at Build each year. We have to put this regular occurrence each month. Or each year, I mean.
You actually are a friend of the show now. So thanks so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you next
Thanks.
year.